All right, welcome everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, it's Total Energies.
TotalEnergies.
This energy giant, you want to know where they stand, and we've been digging through mountains of their own stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Their website, presentations, even their financial reports. Seriously, there's a ton. So we're here to
Distill it down.
exactly get to the good stuff you actually need to know.
It's a fascinating time for them because they're right at this crossroads
Totally.
trying to balance their, traditional oil and gas business with this global push for clean energy.
Right. They've even rebranded, haven't they? It's
Yeah.
not just Total anymore, it's Total Energies, but we're talking a company operating in over 130 countries, huge presence in refining, chemicals, marketing.
Massive.
So how do they plan to manage all of this?
Well, their whole strategy is built on what they call these two pillars.
Two
Number
pillars.
one, their traditional oil and gas operations
Yeah.
with a big focus on that liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Okay, LNG, got it.
And pillar two is what they call integrated power. That covers all their investments in renewables, solar, wind,
Okay.
and even electricity and gas networks.
So two pillars. Okay, I'm with you. But isn't there a sort of inherent conflict there?
Oh, absolutely.
Can a company that's still so heavily invested in fossil fuels really be a leader in clean energy?
That's the question everyone's asking.
Right.
TotalEnergies' argument is that LNG is actually a key part of this whole transition. They're calling it a bridge fuel
A bridge fuel.
to a lower carbon future. Their point is, natural gas, when you burn it, it emits less CO2 than coal.
I see, less polluting during the transition.
Exactly.
But, and this is a big but, some experts say investing in LNG infrastructure could actually lock us into fossil fuels for decades.
Oh, for sure. That's the worry.
Delaying the shift to truly clean energy,
Yeah.
it's a tough one.
Yeah, you've got valid arguments on both sides.
Absolutely. And it's important to be aware of those potential downsides of relying on this, bridge fuel strategy.
Is it really a bridge or just a way to keep using fossil fuels longer? That's the question.
Especially when you look at their production goals. They're aiming for a 3% annual increase in oil and gas production until 2030.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit with their commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050?
It seems contradictory, right?
Right.
But they say they can offset this increased production by cutting emissions in other areas.
Okay.
They're putting money into carbon capture, into renewable.
How to balance the scales?
Exactly. We'll see if they can actually pull it off.
It's a bold strategy for sure. A lot depends on their CEO, right? Patrick Pouyanné.
Oh, definitely.
He's been pushing for a more sustainable business model since he took over in 2015.
Right.
He's the one who really drove that rebranding
Mm-hmm.
and pushed for investments in renewables.
He's a key figure in all of this.
Big time. But he's also had to steer them through some rough times, oil price crashes, the pandemic, geopolitical instability.
It's been a wild ride.
So where does he actually stand on this whole climate action thing?
Publicly, he's backed things like carbon pricing, talked about the need for a global framework to tackle climate change.
Okay, good.
People call them a pragmatic advocate for climate action within the industry. But some are still skeptical, of course.
As you'd expect.
Of course.
It's a tough position to be in, leading an oil and gas giant when everyone's so focused on climate.
It really is.
Well, let's see how all of this plays out in their finances.
Okay, so third quarter of 2024, TotalEnergies reported a net income of $4.1 billion.
Wow.
And for the first 9 months of the year, they're sitting at $13.9 billion.
That's huge, especially with the oil market being so volatile lately.
Right. They're doing pretty well, even with oil dipping below $70 a barrel recently.
And they're saying they can maintain their dividends and share buybacks even if prices drop further.
That's what they're claiming. They just announced a 5% dividend increase for 2025, and they're continuing those $2 billion quarterly share buybacks.
That's a big statement. But let's be honest, it's not all about profits, right? What about energy access for everyone?
Right. That's crucial.
Affordable, reliable energy, it drives development, social progress.
No doubt. TotalEnergies knows this is a big issue, especially for developing nations.
Okay.
They even have data showing the huge gap in energy consumption between developed and developing countries.
It's a big gap for sure.
Some regions have tons of energy resources, while others are struggling to meet basic needs.
This raises a huge new question, though.
What's that?
Can TotalEnergies, with their focus on profits, actually be a force for good in addressing energy poverty?
That is the question, isn't it?
Mm.
It's complicated. They do have initiatives to provide energy access in developing countries,
Right.
but some critics say those efforts are overshadowed by their core business, extracting and selling fossil fuels.
Which can actually make those countries more dependent.
Exactly, and hinder the development of local renewable energy sources.
So there's a potential conflict between their business interests and this commitment to sustainable development.
There is. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
To dig into that further, let's look at their energy outlook for 2024.
Right, the outlook.
It outlines three possible scenarios for the future of energy: trends, momentum, and rupture. Sounds pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it's like they're giving us options for the planet's fate. Trends is the business's usual path,
Oh,
and it leads to a temperature increase of 2.6 to 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Bad news.
so even if every country hits those net zero targets, which is what the momentum scenario is based on.
We're still looking at a temperature increase of 2.2 to 2.3 degrees Celsius.
Too high.
Way too high, exceeding the Paris Agreement goals.
Which makes their rupture scenario the one where we limit warming to 1.7 to 1.8 degrees.
Well, that's pretty impossible.
Almost like a fantasy.
It would take a massive change in how we produce and consume energy.
Absolutely.
A rapid drop in fossil fuel use, a huge increase in renewables, and other low-carbon tech. It's a tall order.
They do stress the importance of focusing on existing, cost-effective decarbonization technologies. What are they talking about specifically?
Things like electrifying transportation, so more electric vehicles,
Makes sense?
switching from fossil fuel heating to electric heat pumps, much more efficient,
Okay.
and of course, getting rid of coal-fired power plants as fast as possible.
That's a big one.
Huge. They're not saying ban coal plants outright, but they know how urgent it is to phase them out.
Right. And even if we stopped building new ones today, a lot of them would keep running for decades.
It's the inertia of the system.
It's a reminder that we need to act fast if we're serious about those climate goals.
We do. And they also bring up a global carbon price.
Okay.
They see it as a key policy to speed up the transition.
Interesting that they're pushing for government intervention.
It shows they know voluntary action won't be enough. We need strong policy signals to drive real change.
They also talk about the need for faster action in India and the global south.
Yeah, that's critical.
Why is that so important?
Because those regions are going to see the biggest growth in energy demand over the next few decades. Population growth, urbanization, rising living standards. If that demand is met with fossil fuels, it's a problem for the whole planet.
So they're pushing for a massive expansion of renewable energy in those areas.
Absolutely.
Mm.
They're calling for more investment, tech transfer, to help those countries transition to a cleaner path.
Makes sense. But it's not just about renewables, right? They also mention making sure the grid can handle more solar and wind power.
You got it. They call it grid stability. As we add more intermittent sources, we need ways to balance things out when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing.
Right, it's not always sunny and windy.
Exactly. And that's where they see a role for natural gas.
Okay.
Gas-fired power plants, they can be a reliable backup for those times when renewable generation is low.
I see their point, but some would argue that goes against this whole idea of moving away from fossil fuels ASAP.
For sure. Critics worry that building new gas infrastructure will just keep us hooked on fossil fuels for longer, delaying the full shift to renewables.
So it seems like they're trying to walk this fine line, making sure energy is secure and affordable in the short term,
Yes.
while pushing for a cleaner system in the long term.
It's a tricky balance,
It really is.
and it's not clear if they can pull it off.
We've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at their strategy, their vision for the future, and this idea of a just transition.
A lot to unpack.
Definitely. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore their approach to this just transition in more detail and really get into their investments in both established and emerging clean technologies.
Sounds good. Hashtag TTS The Deep Dive Episode 2024-11-18, Part 2 of 3.
We just talked about this potential tension, right, between TotalEnergies' goals and their actual actions. To dig into that further, let's look at what they're doing, on the ground. Let's start with this just transition idea. What does it even mean for a huge company like this?
It's a tricky one because it means different things to different people. For TotalEnergies, they're talking about helping those workers in the fossil fuel industry, as those jobs start to disappear. Things like retraining programs.
Okay, so helping those people whose livelihoods are tied to oil and gas find new opportunities makes sense, but is that enough to call it just?
It's a start, but it gets complicated. They're also talking about investing in those regions that depend heavily on fossil fuel revenue, try to create new economic opportunities there as the world moves away from oil and gas.
I see. So thinking about the ripple effects, not just the jobs directly in oil and gas, sounds like a huge task. Any concrete examples of how they're doing this?
They've got some pilot projects, especially in developing countries. Think microgrid initiatives powered by renewables, bringing electricity to communities that have never had it, addresses energy poverty, A&D promotes a cleaner future.
But, and this is a big but, some would say those projects are tiny compared to their main business, still extracting and selling fossil fuels. What's Total Energy's response to that?
They admit it's a huge challenge and are investing billions in renewables. But they also say oil and gas will still be needed for a while, especially as global energy demand keeps growing.
It's like they're trying to play both sides, right? Talk about a just transition, invest in renewables, but still double down on fossil fuels. Clever PR or genuine commitment?
Tough to say for sure. Their actions are moving in the right direction, but the scale and how fast it's happening, that's crucial. Let's go back to their energy outlook. Those three scenarios: trends, momentum, and rupture.
Yeah, those were pretty dramatic. Trends was the scary one. Business as usual, climate disaster, basically.
And even momentum, where every country hits their net zero targets. We still see temperatures rise too much.
So even if everyone tries their best, it might not be enough, according to them.
It emphasizes how important the decisions being made NW are. They're putting billions into both traditional and renewable energy. That has a huge impact.
And they're not just waiting for governments to act. They're pushing for policies like a global carbon price, which would completely change how energy is produced.
What's interesting is that mix of being practical and ambitious. They say oil and gas are still needed, but they're also investing in things like carbon capture, green hydrogen, which aren't really ready for prime time yet.
So hedging their bets, exploring all options while the world figures things out.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, are they leading or just reacting?
It's those little details that make this so hard to figure out. In the end, you have to weigh the evidence and decide for yourself, right? Is Total Energies truly committed to a sustainable future or just trying to hold on to their position?
That's the key takeaway here. There's no easy answer. It's about understanding how complicated it is, the different viewpoints, and forming your own opinion.
Because this energy future, it's not just happening to us. We're all shaping it. Our choices as consumers, investors, citizens, they all matter.
So as you learn more about Total Energies in this energy transition, think critically, ask questions, challenge what you hear, and consider everyone's motivations.
And don't be afraid to have your own opinion. This energy transition needs everyone's voice. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of their investments in clean tech, both the established and the cutting-edge stuff. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-11-18, part 3 of 3.
Okay, so we've really dug into Total Energies, their strategy, their whole vision for the future, this just transition idea.
A lot to think about.
It's complex, but when we started, you wanted to understand where they fit in, right? And it is complicated.
It is, but what's interesting is they're almost a perfect example of the bigger questions everyone's asking. Like, can a company be an oil giant A&D, a clean energy leader?
Right, right. And they're not shying away from that, are they?
No, not at all. You see it in their own reports, like that energy outlook, the trend scenario, remember? Basically saying, if the world keeps going like this, we're in for a climate disaster.
Yeah, that was a bit scary. Even their momentum scenario, everyone hitting their net zero targets, they still say we missed the Paris Agreement goals.
So even with everyone doing their best, it might not be enough.
That's what they're suggesting. And it makes you realize how important the choices being made right now are. They're investing billions in both traditional and renewable energy.
That's a huge amount of money.
It has a ripple effect, for sure. And they're not just waiting around for governments to act. They're pushing for things like a global carbon price, which would totally change the game.
Yeah, imagine that, a price on carbon.
It's fascinating, this mix of pragmatism and ambition. They say oil and gas are still vital, but then they're investing in carbon capture, green hydrogen. Those are long shots.
So hedging their bets, maybe? Trying everything while the world figures things out?
Seems like it. But it also makes you wonder, are they truly leading the way or just reacting to pressure?
It's tough to know. Are those retraining programs for oil workers enough? Are their renewable projects really making a difference?
It's those details that are hard to assess. You, the listener, you have to look at the evidence and decide, right, is Total Energies really serious about a sustainable future or just trying to stay on top?
Exactly. That's the key takeaway here. No easy answers. It's complicated, there's so many different opinions, and ultimately you have to make up your own mind.
And that's really the point of this whole deep dive. It's not about us telling you what to think. It's about giving you the information to form your own informed opinion.
Because this energy future, we're all part of it. Our choices as consumers, as investors, as citizens, they all matter.
Absolutely. So as you keep learning about all of this, about total energies and the whole energy landscape, think critically, ask questions, challenge the things you hear, and consider everyone's motives.
And don't be afraid to have your own opinion. This conversation needs everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Total Energies. We'll see you next time.